But yeah.
Sound like something he would say.
Brenda Bush, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing good. While we were waiting for everybody to come, Brenda, my cousin Naomi in the right-hand corner. Naomi's in the UK. And Tench, you joined us. Andrew Tench. Guys, we're just introducing, we've got Deborah Kay, we've got Naomi, we've got Denise, we've got Deborah Glenn, we've got Leslie Berman, we got Brenda Bush and Andrew. So people are hopping on. I see an iPhone, but I don't know who's behind it. Is that you, Kenna? No, that's Stacy Hansen. Guys, if I'm not careful, this looks just like old Tracy Locke is what's happening here. I think I might have reached out to all my old haunts.
Hey Gail, I did want to share that I found on, I think it was Wikipedia, like a nice family tree that to me was better than the one in the book.
In the book?
And
can you put that on?
It helped me.
Can you put that on our book club page in Facebook? Will it?
Yeah, I'll see if I can re-find it.
Let you upload
it.
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
I use it as a bookmark.
It does get confusing. Darlene Fluker is joined us. I see the face, so you're not gonna do it live. You're just gonna act like you're that cute all the time.
Look,
oh, there you go.
I'm good. Look, it's good for me to be on. I tried one laptop and it wanted to. It didn't want to start up. It's like, okay, so let me go to the other one. I didn't want to do this one, but yay, I made it.
Yay! So, are you caught up in the book? Are you caught up with us?
I'm down to the last few pages of the 6th chapter. So yes.
No. Oh. Andrew, did you get caught up?
Reading today?
Good. Andrew, did you get caught up with us?
I'm at chapter 5.
That's still, it's still part of the good conversations.
Yeah.
All righty. I wonder if we should just jump in or give it like a minute. Esther, how are you? So you're joining us.
Hi.
We got a different group than last week. We're going to have less, but we got a different group, which is going to be good. And Desiree, I see you.
Hey, Des. Denise, hey.
Hi, I miss you.
Oh my gosh. I see some Tracy Locke and some Omnicom people.
Yeah.
Oh, Esther, hey.
Oh, and Brenda. Oh my gosh. I'm from way back in the day, if anybody can remember me.
Dale, did you cut your beard for us? Is this for us? Can you hear us?
What's up?
I'm looking at Dale Tilson right now.
Hey.
Dale, you're muted. There you go. Okay, since I've done it, a little of it, but yeah, we're gonna go ahead and just jump in. I'll at least start with the rules, since some people weren't here the last time. Of course, we already know we're just all here to listen and learn. There are no right or wrong. And because this book is dealing with some sensitive subjects, we all have opinions about it. I mean, we all come from this, and that's why I wanted to start out the book club with this book. But we are respectful of everybody's opinions and all that kind of stuff. We ask that we don't interrupt people as they speak. Since I'm gonna be able to see everybody, you can either raise your hands or you can use that hand raising thing in the what I'm trying to say in the chat or whatever. Or you could, and if you want to talk, if you got some statements that you might feel like you might get lost and don't want to lose it, just stick it in chat, and then you can always talk about it. So let's just jump in. Anybody want to summarize this what we read from Ness all the way? Anybody want to summarize where we are in the deal, or do we want to just jump in chapter by chapter? Who wants to just jump in? Okay, then we'll go in chapter by chapter. What are your thoughts on the interaction between Tom Allen Jr. and Pinky? And why do you think the author chose to just, out of all the things they could have detailed in that section, why do you think that was sort of brought out? Denise?
Well, what I got out of that was it just shows how generations repeat, and how he was just following that James Jr.
Mm-hmm.
was following what he's learned, even at that young age.
Anybody else?
I think more than anything, he wanted us to see, as Denise has said, how that big stick can move from one generation to the other. I thought it was absolutely crazy of his son to believe because his skin was white that he could make this child speak who had not spoken since her mother died. Absolutely absurd. She hadn't spoken to the persons of her own color. So because your sister's dress became wet from a little water that was dry before the father even came out, it was like, well, it was nothing more than white privilege. That's what it was, because since he was the son of the master. But you're going to take a stick. And I was glad to see that Ness was there. Although she suffered as a result of it, I think she felt for certain it was worth it to protect this child.
Good.
Everybody else was thinking that something was wrong with her with this ruse of, oh, look what's going on. We're just trying to make her talk, and you don't know about this shit, Ness. But I wanted to kind of choke that little boy.
Mm. I
really wanted to, come on. You're probably about the same age Pinky is, and from what the book tells us, she's taller than you. Get a grip.
And also that stick, you made me think of the stick, how that was almost like a metaphor. It's just, or it's real. It's literally handed down, that stick. Absolutely. From generation to generation, and it doesn't matter what generation it is and in what form the stick becomes, it's still a stick.
Gotcha. Esther, I thought I saw your hand too. I'm sorry, Denise, were you finished? Sorry.
You know what? I was just asking how far we're supposed to be, because I've just been reading since you recommended it to me, Gail. So I'm finished with Willie.
Oh yeah, we're 4 through 7. Ness, I think we stopped at Abina, if I'm not mistaken. So that's where okay. So we're just taking it like 3 or 4 chapters at a time, since everybody's got all this stuff on their plates. But yeah, I've read it too. Says what I'd like to add to that is, I'm a symbolism kind of girl. So the stick, and also I'm gonna start back where what caught me was the use of the word gallant, because we hear about the gallant South and the protecting of the white woman or whatever. So yes, I saw that more than I saw the obvious in your face about white privilege, but it was the whole gallantry that he was really trying to protect, the damsel in distress kind of thing. And that's where it starts out like that in fairy tales, but in the South, it became, it was dangerous to sort of do anything against a white girl or lady or whatever for a Black child. So a Black person, a Black man. So that's one thing that struck me, was the idea that, say he has never practiced gallantry, because that's what they saw it as being gallantry or chivalrous. The second thing is the stick, and I'm gonna have to get a little obscene to a certain extent, because you'll notice stick is also used as a euphemism for the penis or whatever. So, big stick, if you don't have it, then you get aid or whatever. So I saw both of those things happening, in metaphorical terms, the white guy using the big stick on the Black girl or whatever. So, but that's just how my mind works, y'all. So don't take don't take it at face value that the author necessarily meant that, but it could be read in there. I read it in there. I say it like that. Anybody else? Okay, next question. Ness and Sam sacrificed themselves so that their child could live. And the book also makes reference to mothers killing their children to set them free from slavery. It might have been early on, and it definitely will be as we move forward. What do you feel when you read this section of the chapter? Anybody? Hands up. Esther?
Is this when they run?
Mm-hmm. Well, when they get captured, I mean, when they actually allow themselves to get captured so that they could get away with the baby, I mean, with the child. So yeah, so they're sacrificed, and they know what'll happen when they get back to the plantation, but they sacrifice themselves, and this story is repeated. You know, like I said, this is historical fiction, but in real life, it's repeated over and over that parents have sacrificed themselves to keep either their child or sacrifice their child. I mean, you guys remember Toni Morrison's book, Beloved. You know, there's so many, but those are all fiction. There are stories within our families, about what people would do, you know, because what I've heard from some young people is like, you know, if I was back there, I wouldn't be a slave. I couldn't do it. But there were people that felt like that too, and they didn't make it through. I'm thank God that my parents, some of them, my ancestors made it through. I wouldn't be sitting here if everybody killed themselves, as you know, because it was so horrible. But there were some people, like you said, before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave. I mean, it's that kind of deal. So I didn't know if anybody took, sort of felt that or saw what was happening when they actually decided to, you go on with the child. That's like sending it on into the future, like Superman in, you know, in a Marvel comic, you know. Anybody?
I thought about Beloved as well, because that's probably one of my earliest, that's the first Toni Morrison novel that I read, and that stayed with me forever, that Seth killed her child. But I felt a sense of resignation, this nation, that this is what they had to do and this is what they were going to do, and if she was going to do it, he wasn't going to let her do it without her, in terms of turning themselves in, especially because he'd been punished on her behalf before when they first got together. And then I just thought about how the results of that just destroyed the both of them. And so it was just a sense of hopelessness and loss at that point. They knew what was coming.
And one good thing about this book, you all, is that even though, and I made a deliberate choice of including as many of my white friends as I did my black friends to actually go down this journey with me, is that this is a universal thing, whether it was done, you know, when we're talking about when we're back in Nigeria and things are happening in Africa, it's still, you have to make choices about, you know, and this become a parental thing more than a racial thing too sometimes. What will you do to sacrifice for your child? And that's why my next question is, if you were put yourself in that perspective, and maybe as a white person, you can't put yourself in a black perspective, but if you've got children, you can put yourself in that perspective about your future, you know, this child that you love, what would you do? So would anybody answer that one? From a parent's perspective, how would you react if faced with a similar situation?
I'm not a parent, but as I see in the news, and it's so at the forefront of my mind, is, you know, the immigration crisis that we have going on. And, you know, I just keep thinking, again, I think my whole theme of going through this is trying to put myself in somebody else's shoes, because my life has not had these things in it. So the desperation, what would make a mother, a parent, like in the book, where they sacrifice themselves to send their child out and not get caught again. These parents that are sending their children to the border to get into the United States because it's better than where they're coming from. And the universality of that hits me. I'm like, if we could just put aside and look to see, we all are human in the respect, like, we're going to fight for our kids. We're going to sacrifice for our kids. So don't make somebody do it. Don't put them in that situation to do it, because I think we all would sacrifice ourselves for, you know, again, I don't have children, but, you know, some of the children I know, I would sacrifice myself probably for any child. Because they're human, you know, they're mine because they're human.
It's such a good point. Anybody else?
I saw not only beloved, when Setha slits this baby's throat before she allows her to even go back. But I remember Sophie's choice. Different time, the Holocaust, when the mother gets to the station and she has both her son and her daughter. Mm. And this Nazi soldier says to her, choose. Which one of your children are you going to take with you? Because you cannot take them both. She's got a boy and she's got a girl. The name is going to continue with that boy. That girl is going to marry. But she chooses to give her son away. And so when I saw both Sam and Ness jump out of that tree, she knew what she was doing, but she didn't know he was following her. And so they both made this sacrifice, unbeknownst to one another. Hers was planned, his was impromptu, planned just as much as hers was, but they both jumped down and they know what the situation is going to be. But it's the sake of that child.
Yes.
So when Setha slashes her baby, and when Sophie has to make a choice between which one of her children, she at least has two. But I don't know any parent who is not going to ache for the rest of their lives over that child that they have had to sacrifice. It's a horrible situation to put anything in, to put anybody in. Okay. Maybe I can see it a little better in terms of being an African American and a slave, that I would probably make that same decision if I had to. Probably.
Very good. Brenda?
I just wanted to say I can't imagine, as a parent, I can't imagine being in that situation, and I can't even, without crying, think about being in that situation, because I feel I have it's an impossible choice, and we all know that. Like, you don't want your child to be in slavery, but to send a piece of your heart away is just unfathomable also, and to make that kind of decision, and so it is truly heartbreaking, to think about. And I think I naively just keep thinking about, like, how can systems change on a bigger level. I'm thinking of the article that she wrote also, so that it breaks it from the small. I think maybe it's less painful for me to think of it in a bigger perspective. Like, I always want to go to, like, how can we fix, how can we fix? And maybe that pulls it out of the painful part of the personal and go more global of, like, what can be done. And I think that's because feeling helpless is a terrible feeling. And so if we feel like, what can I do? That's a better feeling to be in. And so I think that's where I go more, instead of, gosh, what would I do in that situation? Because I can hardly stomach to put myself in the situation, even to imagine it, if that makes sense.
I love your little girl, Zia. As I'm saying, if you just think about what we're talking about and the fact that these things actually had to happen, it's very sad. And Deborah K., thank you for bringing it up. Like I said, over and over, we are concentrating on African American and the slavery part of it, but it's choices that people have had to make. We who think we're having a hard life because we got to put on masks and maybe stay in for the pandemic, but when we look at what people really have had to face, and Stacey, you brought up something, I mean, right now, and this is not back in those slavery days, right this moment, somebody is separated from their child because they wanted a better life for their child, and they're really hoping that somebody with a heart will actually pick that child up and take it further. So yeah, this book is literally touching on so many different things. before we move on to the next group, does anybody have anything that I might would have missed? Because I'm making these questions up, just trying to get something that will make us all come out of our hearts and talk about what we're reading. And your point, Brenda, ultimately, that's what moves us into action, is that you have to start with that pain being so great that you can't stay inactive any longer. It's no longer just, I'm a ally on the sideline, we shall overcome. But it becomes, what can I do? Literally, what, if you get in the car and drive down to the south, or whatever, I don't know. But I think that's where we ultimately want to head. Anybody with anything on Ness?
Well, I thought one thing that was,
okay, Brandy first, and then Deborah.
Yeah, a little bit to what Deborah was saying. I'm not familiar with Beloved, but if you're saying that she killed her child, what struck me when you said that was the fact that Ness, who has already had a hard life, the fact that she didn't do that and sent her kid off, was that there was some hope in there, because if she was completely hopeless, it might have gone the Beloved route. And it just struck me, I'm like, these hard people with hard lives, like the fact that she saw hope, that kind of struck me, that, I don't know, there's still potential for good in the world in her mind,
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead, Deb. Was it Deborah? Darlene.
No, it's me, Gail. I was just trying to jump in here, but just to kind of bring all of that forward, I saw a couple of different things. One was, you could say it was coincidental that she asked, Aku to carry the child because she had gotten tired. Remember, she asked her to carry it. Or was it synchronistic that was supposed to happen so that lifeline continued? So therefore, maybe it wasn't a major decision. It was a decision. Mother had to tear herself from her son, but from all of the memories that she had of what had happened to her, she knew what would happen to her. She knew what it would be like, but she also knew that she had already set her son onto a path of a better life. So was it coincidental? Was it synchronistic? Was it one of those, those moments of, divine intervention? Where the child was able to move forward. And as a result, what Ness and Sam had done was really a distraction from the inevitable.
I like that. One of the things, Brandy, that, I think the difference in hopelessness and hope, having just a glimmer of it. I love the fact that Ness actually recognized her mother, who was, was called the frowning one and never smiled. But she recognized love and recognized, even being torn away, that she carried that. And I think she actually said something, that she really saw love as being something different than what we would say, it's that whole rugged, strong strength or whatever. So I think that gave her a different form of hope than the mother in Beloved, who had experienced Sweet Home and didn't want her child to be raped or go through any of that. Send it on to God, back to God would have been her. So having two different perspectives, on it is I think what actually leaves people either with hope, even though it looks horrible, but having that little glimmer of hope will actually keep this line going. Denny?
Oh, I actually highlighted that line because it was so impactful. She said she would always miss the gray rock of her mother's heart. She would always associate real love with the hardness of spirit.
Yeah, that touched me, because I was raised by my grandmother, who had polio and who was always in pain. But, some people would say she was mean. Well, we knew it was as love. We knew she was a disciplinarian. We knew she was brought up in the Depression. So she had a toughness, whereas my mother was a sweet person. So I saw both of them, but I recognized my grandmother's strength and her kind of love as love. So that resonated with me to tears, literally. I mean, because nobody had expressed it and made me feel what I knew I felt for Fannie Mae, So anyway, that stuck with me. And I think that's how we overcome to a certain extent, because it does. And if you go through and you've been loved by somebody like that, you keep hope, because it actually overcomes everything else. So great points, guys. Let's move on to, unless somebody has something I've missed. let's move on and go back to Africa and pick up Mr. James. I tell you, my question is coming, like I said, I question the things that resonate with me, but you guys can always tell me what you're thinking. I'm just, I'll just sort of start the conversations off. But in the chapter, the author makes an analogy comparing the Gold Coast to groundnut soup. And by the way, if you've never had groundnut soup, it's very good. Think of gumbo, but a different flavor, but lots of stuff in it, okay? And lots of really good mixing of stuff, and very, very spicy. Anyway, so compare the Gold Coast to groundnut soup. What are your thoughts on this? Anybody?
So are you saying that one analogy for groundnut soup would be like our Creole, like our stews or our gumbos?
Well, she actually made that point. She said that the Asante people maybe were the broth and
right,
the Fantis were something else. In other words, they were always fighting, but when the colonizers came, they just sort of lit the fire up a little more and kept it going. But
exactly.
the human part of them conquering and overcoming and all that was always there, and it's going to be there even after if the people move and not there for slavery or whatever. So I just didn't know if anybody else picked up on that and actually see what we see as the world, whether we're talking about Russia, China, whatever that's happening, that groundnut soup, putting all that stuff in a pot and putting a fire underneath of it, something's going to boil over, So I'm just wondering if anybody else picked up on that. Or am I asking too obscure of a question?
No, I got that as well, but I also, in my mind too, was thinking of how many contributors it takes to get the pot boiling, and how one. I mean, I was thinking in a total analogy of a pot of stew where too much of one thing can ruin the flavor of the other, and it took this balance, and then the white man was the one that lit the fire, basically.
But it's amazing, the same thing that we're talking about that makes it boil over, something can make it, if we were to do it correctly, it could be the best taste and the best thing that you could possibly have. So that was my other thing, that was the opposite of what really happens when you get all this stuff together. At first it's just boiling over and it's madness. Anyway.
I think that it's still madness, regardless of how many you have in the pot. We're this land of the melting pot. What's melting now? What's happening now?
But what could the ideal be? That's what we're talking about. A melting pot. That's what I'm going for. Is that gumbo? Everything is perfect.
I don't know that any of us really know. I don't know that where we are today and where they were then in the society that they're in. Do we really know? Do we really have any idea?
I think people dreamed that the founding father, whoever, even if don't include the potatoes or the carrots or whatever, but somebody has an idea. That's how we can go on. And then we've got other people who want to make this stew work. So that, to me, that's what we're talking about. I think, Andrew, I thought I saw your hand.
Well, on the front of what does it remind me of? It reminds me of after World War I, when the European countries divided up what used to be the Turkish Empire for oil. And I think there's a mention in the book about how the British were always behind kicking up the heat just a little bit more to keep it, at a hot boil. That wicked slyness in their method to keep everybody inner fighting was, it really got to me. But then when you started talking about how groundnut soup is spicy, maybe it's because it's around lunchtime. It got me hungry.
Yeah.
But I thought, geez, what would have happened with Ashanti-land and the Fanti and all of the west coast of Africa had that European intervention not happened. You know what?
Absolutely.
Because so much of the African conflict was dividing up the continent in ways that were not geographic or ethnic. It was more about who wants what, and you know, whether the Belgians want this and the Germans want that, and the British want that, the French, etc. I don't know. It made me want to fantasize about what could have been.
I wish Tom was here because we have great conversations wrapped around that. Before there was any intervention, just because humans being humans, there was, I'm sorry, is that some? There was always conflict. It's tribalism, it's religion, it's, you know, your scar is on the left and mine is on the right. It's small things, but wars are built over it. But yes, and that's where the soup metaphor was so good, because you already have these tensions and you already have these people killing each other for what looks like to us, because we're looking from the outside, the slightest things, but these are life and death issues to them. But then you light a fire under it, you know? So I think that what you would have seen is still, it might not have exploded as quickly, but you still would have seen strife. I mean, that's what you're seeing all over this world, which, you know, for those of us who are Christians, we know what the cause of it is evil does exist, regardless whether it's in a vacuum. And, you know, because we always think that if the people who live in the Brazil rainforest, if they're not Brazilian rainforest, if they're not ever touched by Western civilization, they're going to be this perfect tribe, and they're not. You know, they hurt each other. They do the same things that we do on a bigger scale, but we just don't know how to look at it, I think. So that's my opinion on it.
That's what I was. That was the thing that I saw before anybody ever got on the continent of Africa. There was already strife.
Of course.
If, you know, you got, like, as you said, one tribe against another, one side against another, because human beings are just full of conflict, period. And you're never going to agree, because I comb my hair to the right, you comb yours to the left. Well, that's against the law of the right side. So there's so many things going on where there is no unity from the very beginning, other than the fact that we all in the same location.
But I think Westerners have figured out how to take chaos and take this conflict and actually organize it and make it, you know, to their benefit. That's sort of what we're talking about to a certain extent.
But yeah, to the benefit that prior to the British and all of the rest of the colonizers coming in and making it even worse.
Yeah. So yeah, Darlene, your mic.
And not to jump too far forward, but remember, in part of the conversation with James, and I think it was David that said, you know, I can't imagine what the slaves in America are going through, because even though we have slaves here, we don't treat our slaves like that. Now, they would beat them, of course, but, you know, but it wasn't the same type of hell, you know, cargoing people and putting them in prisons such as they did. It was a different type of hell. And even though both Africans and the British were about power, and that's all it is about, is power and riches, I think maybe the definition of power was different for the two sides. And I could be wrong, but because of the British having no regard for a people that was a different color tone and of a different language and of a different way of living, they assumed authority and they assumed superiority and no regard to human life, as we see now, even with, you know, the Black Lives Matter. But I think it was to what you're saying, and Andrew, I think you brought that point in too, of it just being, you know, I don't know your language, so I really don't give a care about you. All I know is that you can provide me wealth and power. And whereas the Africans were saying, look, you know, you are my slaves, but slavery wasn't the same. It wasn't the same style of slavery.
Well, I'm gonna be the devil's avocado, as Kim Hansen, one of my friends, would say. and say it's also one of those things, just like we see in religion, where my sin is better than your sin. You know, I think that I'm not going to see me as being as bad as the white guy in the South. You know, I treat my slaves nice, so whatever. So I just still think it's one of those, you hit it on the head. It's power, greed, you know, and money and all this kind of stuff. So regardless of who's doing it, and if they see themselves as being kinder or whatever, but I understand what you're saying though. Is anybody else want to hit on that subject? I think we're.
Yeah.
Is that Kenneth?
Yeah. I had problems logging in, but anyway, long and short of it is what I really like about this book collectively. It reminds me is that as we never got this side of the story completely in history or even through narratives that we've seen, is that the ultimate thing is globally, you've always had caste systems in place in every country where people of lower economic means were treated differently. That's just a fact. In India, the same way, you know, your plight is your plight. But what I found most interesting is how, while the British understood the culture of Africa and tribes, and they really capitalized on that. And I do think in many ways, some of the tribes, the Ashanti and Fantis, may have understood, but they may have been played against each other in some ways. But I think the ultimate goal for them was, like you said, like many have said, is that it was tribal. So therefore, while they understood maybe what they were doing was not that the British were taking and were really benefiting from what they were doing, in the midst of it, maybe they weren't as concerned because it wasn't happening to them. But I do think that the British really did take advantage or understood the culture. While they didn't respect them because they were different colors, they did respect the fact that they had riches and things they wanted for them. So they capitalized on that. And they not only capitalized on that, they had a strategic plan in place to not only get slaves, and not only benefit from it financially, but to carry it on beyond just 1 year. Think about it. It was really a strategic plan that really kind of went global. And so in many ways, I think about it, even when I look at what's happening in Britain now, or over what's happening there over now, they themselves have never really taken ownership of their really role in how we got to this place. And that's mind blowing to me, because I never thought about it in that way before.
Well, I'm glad that awakened that. You know, that's what this book was meant to do, and it literally, we could beat this dead horse because we know what she's obviously trying to say, but there are these nuances. So I do agree with you, Kenna. Moving on, let's ask about James and Quay. Different views when it comes to duty. You know, what do you think contributes to these different views? Do you all remember this part? Did anybody pick up on that part about just duty? I see those books coming out.
So, Gail, my first thought was, were there really different views? Because Quay was kind of forced into his position. Mm-hmm. He didn't really want that role. And I think James didn't respect him for that. And then later on, he chose, this is the way I saw it. Then later on, he totally chose, say, his heart, and he chose a way that was totally different. And he didn't want it either. So I just questioned it. Were they really different?
Well, I mean, to the point of, to me, you know, there are certain things that we'll do because this is what, you know, our duty is to keep it going. And there are people who would say, I don't care if this is the duty. I don't agree with this. I mean, let's go with Harry and William right now. You know, it's one of those, what is the duty and what have you chosen? What are you going to choose to do? You know, so you can look at it, whether you're talking about the perspective of what you choose to do with. The duty might be something that is hard and fast, but do you choose to follow that particular deal? Or, you know, even though you don't want to do it, but you just do it because that's why I'm here. I'm here to fulfill that or whatever. That's how I saw it. Anybody? Brenda and then Brandy.
I just wanted to say I love that James went off on his own and was willing to, you know, break a cycle, and how he felt that his, you know, unlucky, terrible plots of land were still like just such a blessing, and that he'd had the power and he was willing to set that aside to be free of that. And so, I mean, that to me speaks to, what a different kind of freedom, the freedom from that kind of duty, the freedom from that kind of expectation, and the freedom even from, yes, he had power, but it wasn't in a way that he wanted it, and it wasn't in, he had ethical problems with it, and he was able to walk away from it. And even though he lost everything financially, I think he felt rich till the end. And so I really liked the James and the Abina chapters, to kind of see that he kept that perspective of gratefulness, and it seemed like he was very much at peace with the choice and the path that he had made.
Good. Brandy?
Yeah, playing off of that, because I did love James's outlook and his gratefulness towards the situation. But the difference I see, I think he did have a sense of duty, but then he met and now I'm not remembering her name, but his wife. He fell in love. Love was like a story here, whereas for Quay, they kind of hinted at it maybe with his friend, but that wasn't an option, for him. So he had nothing else, and so he, duty was all he had. Whereas James, whether, like, she probably opened his eyes, because maybe I think he knew something was off, but it wasn't until she wouldn't shake his hand that it was really like made him take pause in it and maybe question his duty. But for him, I was like, that to me was like maybe the deciding factor was that love was part of it for him. And then he never looked back. Then I did love that, like that he just was so grateful for it. And even though the people were calling him unlucky and they thought like he couldn't get multiple wives, like he didn't want multiple wives. I agree. I love those chapters with him and his daughter.
One of the things that I think is where we are now in America as far as trying to change this whole system, James actually was, and that's all about duty or tradition or whatever we want to call this thing. He actually had to like kill it, have himself killed sort of, to actually move into another life or whatever, because if he had remained, he would have had to have continued on in that tradition. So to me, when I think about that particular part, I think about what the pandemic and what all the stuff last summer with George Floyd and everything, what it's done to America. And we can go the traditional route, the way a lot of the Republicans want us to, go back to make America great, whatever they think was great or whatever, or we can actually kill all of this and go in a whole nother direction. And that leads me to my next question. And that was about, why do you think James wanted it so desperately? He used this phrase, I want to have my own nation, be my own nation. At first I'm thinking, are they going to have a lot of kids and he's going to try to take the whole path, make a tribe that goes differently than the Asantes and the Fantis and everybody else. But it was something more deep than that. So did anybody pick up on that or have anything to comment on why he would actually want to have his own nation and not follow the traditions of any of these other duties?
I think he's disgusted with the nation, so he wants to change. He reminds me of the kids that protested this summer. Not that there were not protests before, because this thing with civil rights and human rights has been going on since the beginning of time, even in Dallas. But by the same token, he wants something different. And I'm not really sure all the time that he knows what the difference is in what he wants, other than I just don't know. I just don't want what I see.
Yes.
He's an optimist.
Yeah.
And he's one who has married for love.
Yeah.
And that takes courage. He's heard his mother say, my dad is a weak man, but he doesn't want to be weak. But anybody that goes against or changes to make a turn against what they have seen or what has been considered the norm in society, it's going to take courage.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
The relationship between James and Abina, particularly when he finally lets her go, because she's just like her father. She wants that change. She wants to see. But I do. I think he really doesn't know what he wants. He just doesn't want what he has already had or what he has seen. So he's moving into something.
Mm-hmm. Naomi Jane?
I'm in complete agreement with what Deborah's just said. And in fact, it probably mirrors everything that I was about to say. I think with these two subsequent chapters in particular, you can see how James has identified the generational kind of obligations and traditions that have been bestowed from generation to generation, and yet they haven't really accomplished much change. And I think with him seeing his parents' relationship and how fractious it can be, he's realised that he wants more for his future and can see that window of opportunity, if that makes sense, what I'm trying to explain or say. I think he's just jaded by...
I like that word.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I like that word, jaded.
Yeah, I think he's jaded by, I think he has quite a broad perspective on things and can see that he's gonna follow through the same pattern and routine in his life if he doesn't break that chain of events that recurrently take place. And I think he can see the faults that have happened. He's seen the slavery and how people are taken and where they're kept in the castle, or that's, you know, he's been made aware of that, and he doesn't want that for himself, and he doesn't want that for his future, and he doesn't want that for his future generation. So I think he's kind of insightful, and that's why he's saying he wants to start his own nation, because he doesn't want to be associated with that. He wants more hope, and acknowledges that he wants to marry somebody, not because it's expected of him, but he wants to marry and love someone based on his own expectations.
I like that. I think that's exactly how I would actually look at it in that vein. Leslie?
I just wanted to say before we leave James that it was really eye-opening to me when Akosua said to him that she will not shake the hand of a slaver, you know, and that she could have been slapped, she could have been hurt, who knows what all, but she like drew a line in the sand. And, you know, that's kind of what I'm trying to do in my life these days. So, just something as little as that was still a stand, and I just wanted to call that out.
So, and I think, and somebody said earlier that when he met her, that was the change, but I think it was all those things that she was saying that got him thinking, you know, that was already in his mind, but yeah, he saw her make that stand, and that's why these small things that we're doing lead to big changes, guys. It really does.
Amen.
James, anything else on James? We're going to run out of time, and I definitely want to get to Kojo and Abina, but James, I can't leave him if somebody has something else to say.
So just one point, Gail, before we run out of time, I want to say about that, and it's sort of what Leslie and everyone else has said too, and starting with what you said about tradition. I agree. In my opinion, he wanted to break from that tradition. I had to make notes, but something else that you said was about the death. You know, he had to kill himself, and you know, you think biblical Paul to Saul or whatever it is, and that was that thing that helped him. However, the key thing that I wanted to bring out is that it was a woman. It was a woman who awakened him, who made him say, okay, you know, yeah, I could have killed her, I could have done whatever else, but there was something that was inside of him that he needed to know more. He searched her out. 10 miles. I was thinking, my God, how can you walk 10 miles? He walked 10 miles to query her and to get an understanding from her. And then when he went, he knew what the answers was, but he wanted someone to validate his action by going not only to the witch, but also talking to his grandma. And the one thing that the witch told him was that you will know it. You will know what to do. And the same is true about his new nation. He doesn't know what it is, but he will know it when it's when it's birthed, because that old way of thinking in a way is if it's not dead, it's dying, because he really had some inner turmoil around that. So I thought that was that new birth of something greater to happen. And like you said, we don't know what it's going to look like.
Now you've got me stirred up again, because I'm not going to call her a witch, but he did go to he counseled with her,
yeah.
He counseled with an elder, and then he counseled with his love. But if you notice, all of his counselors were, the queen on the chessboard were queens. So I caught all of that too. So that was wonderful. Okay, moving on to Kojo, guys. And see, it segues so well into this whole religious aspect of it. Kojo and Maku attend church when he is young, but they get kicked out because the pastor thought they were practicing old African witchcraft. So contrast this just 2 generations before him, his grandmama, mama, grandmama, great-grandmama. That was part of their culture. You want to call it religion, just like I think somebody made a point of it. It's like, what's all this black magic you're talking about? This is just what we do. But anyway, what are your thoughts on the loss of identity and traditions that many slaves and former slaves faced during this time?
Well, that part really struck me. I raised my hand for the comment about the knife.
I didn't see that. Add it in.
No, well, okay, all right. With that, that quote about pulling the knife out slowly, you can't pull it out slowly so that it can be clean and leave no mess. That was James knowing that the repercussions of what his family was already entrenched in were going to keep going on and on and on. So he couldn't say, all right, things will change because the British, have outlawed slavery. He knew that it was still just at the beginning. And that reminded me of Malcolm X's quote about putting a knife in your back and you can't pull it out 6 inches and then, say everything's okay. It's about healing the wounds afterward. So James himself knew, and it really struck me about how it is today, still in Africa, in America, in Britain, that these wounds are still festering. The blood is still on the ground, and it's an ongoing generation after generation effort to actually fix and heal the wounds. So, but I kept my hand up to talk about Kojo and Ma'aku because that really struck me. I think that the way the culture could so swiftly be robbed and just decimated and then just basically considered forbidden, where you could be shunned. It was so effective. And I don't have a lot of deep thoughts to say about it, but it seems like in order to go along and get along and survive as a community, people would just flock together and decide this is acceptable and this is not. And what had been sort of placed upon them and forced onto them when they were brought over and introduced to Christianity, that had to supersede all the previous culture, that had to supersede all the other traditions, and that just became the thing that they clung to instead of their real roots.
Very good. Brenda?
I think
I'm sorry, Joan. Brenda.
Okay, so I was, the identity thing that struck me also was how so many of the families in the Baltimore area started having a last name Freeman, and I felt so dense that I hadn't connected the dots there before, that's where that last name came from. But yeah, it is that, that the loss of identity of taking another name. And then I was really struck by, the passing of the warning and then the passing of the Runaway Slave Act, and how people who had been free were now in fear and having to carry papers. And I that felt very visceral to me reading all that. And I think I have a an expectation of progress, that things are always getting better and are always going to get better. And so seeing that people who have been freed, like, lights that optimism in me, and then going like, now we're going backwards with this, you know, with this law, and things are getting worse. It's hard. It's painful to see. It's hard to see. And it was, yeah, that was just, that I feel like I've learned a lot more through this than I certainly did in a lot of my American history classes. It feels a lot more tangible and personal about how this happened. And it's just hard for me to wrap my head around how so many of these things could happen, and that when what's right and what is progress seems so clear, it's really hard for me to wrap my head around how that's not obvious to everyone. So
it's a really good point. You know, there's a saying in my community that 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's like a samba. But because of those 1 step forward every time, it just, the wheels of justice just move very, very slowly. Joan?
Yes, one of the things I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is that how far back our issues with police go. Kojo was always panicked. The people that after the Fugitive Slave Act, those same people are the people who became policemen, who have hunted down Black men for hundreds of years. And those same people in those same law enforcement roles are still issues for us, things that we're still fighting today. And another point about tradition, one of the sad things, besides not knowing, okay, I came from this part of West Africa or whatever, is that we lost even the knowledge. You know, I had to study before I realized that some things that I did, that my mother and grandmother did, were directly related to their African past. And so it wasn't until I studied more about African food and culture that I realized that all of it wasn't lost.
Amen.
That many of those same food traditions, food preparation, that they did endure. You know, we changed ingredients based on what was available, but there's a lot that we did not lose. We just didn't know where it came from, other than coming from Big Mama or Grandmama. We didn't know beyond that where it came from. And so what we sometimes find ourselves hopefully doing is not just remember what was taken, but what still remains.
Very good. Very good. Like I said, one of my blessings about Tom and I meeting at such an early age in my life is that my mother was still here to actually go through some of the things that she learned from her mother and grandmother, and the things that we've learned. And we found that it was exactly, talking to Tom's mom, Tom's grandma, is exactly, they raised me as an African woman, to be quite honest, which is why, one of the only reasons why I can be Tom's wife at this point, because other than that, we would have killed each other a long time ago, believe you. So I think that these points that we're making, we could have always look at what we lost, but the fact that we are a storytelling people, and just like I said, what we see in this book, we have kept going within our families. We didn't have the roots of where it came from. We had some ideas, because, you know, we always talked about that old lady that knew all the things about herbs. You know, we knew she was a little different. We knew that Sister Jane went to see the root work. You know, we would laugh at it, but we knew where she lived, and we knew what she did. She was a doula, a midwife, or we didn't get to go to the doctors in the 50s, so she kept us all alive, you know. So we knew that she didn't go to church either, you know. So sort of we knew all of these things and didn't know it. You know, it was one of those hidden secrets, just like we knew. And we've always said, and that's why it was so good to see the awakening that happened last summer. We knew all the time that inside of each of these police forces, my brother was the chief of police in a small town in Kaufman, and he knew when he was a little boy, the stories and the people that were seated in this community. In the VFW in Kaufman, we used to call that the Klan meeting place. I mean, that's what it was, literally. And the police force, when they would come through the neighborhood at night, you know, we knew what was going to happen. Somebody was going to get taken out in the country, you know. So to know that and to say it over and over, but then all of a sudden somebody saw it on TV all over the world. How that happened, we don't know. But now people know that we've been saying the same thing, you know. So I think making those points are really good. I don't see any hands, so we're going to move to Abina. Don't want to leave her out.
Oh no, don't go, don't. I love Joe.
Okay.
I love Joe.
Okay.
I love the fact that he loves his wife. He has 7 children.
Yep.
All alphabetically named.
I do.
And we're waiting for H that we don't get an opportunity to see. But there's something beautiful about this idea of marriage for protection. And with Joe, that protection means I take care of you. I am here for you. Yeah. And the fact that his name is Freeman, I am a free man now in disguise, whatever it is. But there's something about the way he loves her, the way he protects every one of those children, and even drills them about when the Fugitive Slave Act is made, and he lines them all up and he gives them the trial of, where are you going? Show me your papers. It's all about that protection. We saw that protection in terms of power when we first meet all of these people. And now we see that marriage that has changed. And it's all about protection. I thought that was probably the most beautiful aspect so far for me of this book. The love he has, and then he loses her. I wanted to cry.
Yeah. So Gail, can I just add that portion
before you, darling? I mean, I'll bring you in.
I'm sorry.
But I've got Brenda, Denise, and then you. Okay. Brenda.
Oh, sorry. What you were just saying about the part where he's having his children rehearse being stopped and interrogated, you know, by the police, and he's going through that about protecting his children. It reminds me of just something that I was hearing on the radio, and, you know, and reading about and reflecting on when, you know, last summer with the George Floyd, and that what it was saying was, it is common for Black families to teach their children about how to interact with the police and all of that, because they're trying to protect them. And white families also are trying to protect their children, and we don't say anything because we want to protect our children from knowing the ugliness in the world and how not saying anything is furthering that harm. And so I had not thought of that perspective before. And so that was a wake-up call for me, that I have to have those conversations, you know, with our, you know, with our children. And I think that was a really genuine point, that all parents want to protect their children, but because of the systemic racism, we're doing it in such vastly different ways, and that's contributing to the problem. So that just kind of, it's not about the book exactly, it's jumped off from the book, but I was just reflecting on that.
I think that you just made a point that if nothing else comes out of book club, I'm so glad to hear you actually voice that, because you got beautiful kids. And, you know, we have the talk at an early age. You know, maybe it is destroying innocence to a certain extent, but I'd rather for them to have innocent and be alive than not to have that conversation on our side. Denny?
Yeah, I was kind of on the same line as what Brenda just said, piggybacking off of what Deborah said about how wonderful of a father Joe was, and with the kids and lining them up and everything. But it also, that part also made me think of how systemic it is, that, and it becomes ingrained, the fear that that is put into children at such a young age out of necessity, you know, obviously, but also like how the same police officers, a lot of their line become police officers. And so you've got that same mentality on the white end of the spectrum. And then you've got, you know, generation after generation of people of color having to be told that they have to constantly be on the lookout for danger, because you never know when you're going to be in danger. And that just gets into you. I mean, I know even just as myself growing up in certain situations in my own family of relatives that cheated other relatives, and you can't trust anybody, and just the signals that your parents give off all the time, that becomes part of you. And it's just, you know, and sometimes what's going on in the world now, I've told some people I know, it's like, you know, they talk about the riots and stuff that came out of some of the peaceful protesting. I'm like, well, you know, sometimes a bomb has to be dropped in order for things to really change. You know, how many more years do we have to go with baby steps? Sorry, it just makes me so angry. It's like, ah.
Thanks, Denise. Darlene?
So I think what was so awesome about James's story was that first, when we go back to Ness and Sam, if you want to say sacrificing, making that decision or whatever it was, for him to live, to become this man that he is now. And then just a sheer fact that she tells this story of Black male love. Black men are capable of loving their wives, their family, like we see it here, and how this lie has been perpetuated, that Black men can't love like this, you know, that all you want to do is make babies. But she goes into the intimacy of why he loves this woman, you know, and how that comfort of his, that family is his comfort, just like anybody else. And it takes me back to that story that Cicely Tyson told when she was doing, was it the autobiography of Mary Jane Pittman, when the son calls his father dad or something of that nature. And then there was a white reporter in the story that says that bothered him. And in her mind, it was because it bothered him because he couldn't think of a Black man or Black son calling his father dad, just as his kids, his sons called them dad. He couldn't think of them on that level. So I just thought it was dynamic that she took that time to build his story and to tell his story of that Black man love, and that, you know, this Black man loved his family just as much as any other person. And it was just awesome to me. So, and then of course it brought me back to the story. Have you had that story with you? Have you told your sons, you know, how to behave in public? Like Brenda and Denise was saying. So
thank you. John?
Yeah, there were a couple of things wanted to bring out, and that have, again, repercussions today. The constant the trauma that this constant attack on Black people, it also manifests itself in our health. You know, people, you know, want to talk about, you know, Blacks and high blood pressure, Blacks and diabetes and all of these, but generations of trauma and have also contributed to those things. Also with Kojo, and so the things of racism are sometimes not always the beatings, the putting in jail, the unfair rules about housing. it's these constant daily, never get a chance to rest and breathe. I mean, even those of us, who are college educated and have seen the world and all of these things, you can't escape it. Just recently, we celebrated, some of us, a lot of us, this change with Biden and Kamala Harris, and not even 2 months. And there are states that are restricting rights that we think we have gained years and years ago. And so I say to those that are our partners and allies that you have to know you cannot stop fighting. You cannot stop speaking out on behalf of those of us who maybe sometimes are not in the room. You cannot, it just continues. And so I'm asking you also to be like us and look for these other things, these other insidious ways in which people in power try to keep us, questioning each other and mistrusting and all of those things. But and also know what the Fugitive Slave Act did. That really accelerated the fight of abolitionists for the Civil War. So there are just there's so much in her writing that you could really talk about.
Thank you. We're going to have to bring Abina into next week's with H, Aku, and Willie. So we're reading chapters 8 through 10 if you haven't read that far, but we'll take up the discussion of Abina because I think, like I said, each one of these characters are just crucial, not just for them as being living on the page and us getting something from it, but they're actually pushing these ideas forward. So I don't want to miss her and talking about the things that she would push forward, but we're about 11 minutes over. Guys, this is wonderful. I really appreciate that you all are using this as a safe space and everybody's talking about what they want to say. And like I said, if it feels harsh, if it feels like everybody is pushing some agenda, the only agenda is we need to know how to talk about this thing, and we need to know how to take it further. So without too much more, unless I've got anybody who hasn't had a moment to say anything, if you've got anything you want to say before we all hop off, it's your turn. Tench?
Gail?
Just 1 second and I'll get you next, okay? So Tench and then Kenna.
She is just a delight to read.
Yes.
Every single one of these characters I fell in love with, and then it's the next chapter and I'm like, oh, I wanted to stay with them. So great choice in the book. It is wonderful.
Oh, you just reminded me. 1 second, Kenna. If you guys want suggestions, so I don't just be, I love having this power, by the way. Power does corrupt. And so I won't be the one just always telling y'all what to read next. Please.
We know.
I know y'all all love me and know this about me already. So, but yeah, shoot me any ideas that you have for our next book, because I would love to bring it out in the next 2 meetings so we can order it and get started for the next month, those who are going to keep on this journey with me. It doesn't necessarily have to have this black-white modem, but since I am all about diversity these days in my life and in my job, I would love for us to be able to keep these kind of conversations going. So whether it's Asian Pacific, whether it's indigenous people, whether it's, people of Irish, I don't care, as long as the book is engaging and we actually learn and live and able to have these kind of conversations, I'm good. But,
I just want to say in selecting books, and we can broaden diversity. I mean, there are definitely rural issues and
exactly
versus urban and
gender,
so,
all kinds of things. Yes.
Yeah, it covers quite a bit.
But just make the book interesting, y'all. I don't want any kind of because I read for learning in one sense. I do want fiction. I do want action. That's just me. I'm just giving y'all what Gail's rule of what she wants to read for fun. But I want my fun to be to actually inform too, though. So, but I can't read like you know, those of you who read White Fragility, those of you who read those kind of books to get woke or whatever, I don't necessarily want those books. I do want it to have plots and you know, I'm a old-fashioned fiction writer, so I love that kind of stuff. So, but it can also incorporate those things. So I'm sorry, Kenna, I took some of your moment.
Oh, that's no. I just want to quickly say, I think beyond crying through the whole thing, Ness is my soul, and I think there was a love story between her and Sam that was profound. How the power of love can make you persevere through all the pain, and the fact that they gave up their son. I think that her decision was on purpose. But also, I think the frown reminded me of people telling me as a girl, stop frowning. I'm sorry, but even my mom, people commenting on her being really hard, and I think I connected with Ness because I saw. But sometimes the frown is the wall of strength that keeps you pressing forward through your pain. So that's all I guess I want to say.
I think that was a profound statement. And you realize her name, Ness, came out of her mama being beat and saying, oh my goodness.
Ness.
Yes.
No, so, you know, so where you're coming from, Kenna, you just touched my heart again, just like the whole deal with Ness. So thank you guys. I love each one of you all. We're missing some crucial people. I miss everybody who's not here. Next week, starting with Abina, and then the other chapters that we already assigned. Same time, same bat station, and the Zoom is set up for the next. So just click on the Zoom from the old ones. Okay. Good seeing you, Becky. Sorry you missed so much of it trying to get in. All right. Love you guys. Bye.
Take care. Later. Blessings.